In her TED Talk prescribing nature for health, Dr. Nasheen Razani speaks about how when in urban environments we are constantly being subconsciously guided. This phenomenon, known as environmental psychology, is a concept which we can expand upon and also apply to musical composition. By recording sounds from a specific environment, you are then equipped with a palette of noise that you can apply to your own compositions. The characteristics of the sounds collected from specific environments then comes to guide the compositional process in itself. This is the basis for the Guided by Environment song series. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. Field recordings in music possess a wealth of questions that we need to address. With the accessibility of DAWs on the rise, it has become so easy to take a field recording of, say, some birds and lay it over a track for some ambience without actually thinking or addressing the implications that come from using nature recordings in music. Before I talk to you a little bit more about some of the intricacies of actually using field recordings in your work, I'm going to take you through some of the session files for Guided by Environment. The first tune we're going to look at, just as all Guided by Environment tracks do, began with a field recording session. And for this session, I recorded my footsteps of me walking through a woods near Dumfries. So we're back in the DAW and we have our recording of our footsteps. So you get the point. Now, before every Guided by Environment song, I try and pick a composition technique to focus on. So for Guided by Environment 4, what I wanted to kind of experiment with was warping and time stretching. So we'll take our footsteps through the woods, hit warp, and then I'm going to hit this button here, which doubles the original tempo. So we're going to hit that a couple of times, and that just really stretches the clip out. So now we have all of these kind of fantastic glitchy sounds. So all I did was take a couple of bars of that, and that basically became the basis for Guided by Environment 4. And I used these are called warp markers. What I did was I moved things about just to make it slightly more rhythmic than it originally was. And what I ended up coming away with was this clip. And then layered with everything else, that went on to kind of become the main basis for the whole Guided by Environment song. I really enjoy using time stretching as a composition device, mainly because it kind of preserves that organic feel of like the ground or whatever you're recording. Whereas there's a lot of other methods I tend to use in the Guided by Environment series, which are more focused towards completely destroying sounds and piling effects on them. Speaking about totally manipulating sounds, that's actually what I did for Guided by Environment number 5. For this song, I wanted to focus on bass production, and to do that I actually used a technique called sine compression. What sine compression is taking a sine wave just like we have loaded in our synth here, and you pile lots and lots and lots of effects onto it to produce kind of wacky, almost like neuro-based sounds. So we have our sine wave, and then I've got an audio effect track which has several multi-band compressors. I've got an erosion, I've got a saturator, more multiband compression, some filtering, a phaser, an overdrive, a vocoder. So you get the point. You really need to put lots and lots of stuff on. So we have our original sine wave, which is very quiet. But then, once you turn on this audio effects rack with this excessive amount of sound processing, you have a lot of kind of bigger, fatter bass tones, and then you can resample that. Turn it up a bit more in an ideal world. And then from this resampled part, you can basically go in and pick away some of your favorite parts and some of your favorite bassy textures. So this is exactly what I did to make the basses for Guided by Environment number 5, except instead of using a sine wave as the original signal, I used the recording I took of me and my friends walking up a hill, and I put it into a granular synthesizer. Anyone who doesn't know, granular synthesis is a type of synthesis that relies on using a sample. However, instead of playing the sample from front to back like you normally would, it actually just takes really tiny bits of the samples called grains, and that's what makes your music. After I put the recording into the granular synthesizer, I then used a little bit of processing to just beef it out. Although I didn't use as much processing as I normally would if I was doing sine compression with a sine wave, just because with a sine wave, you have so many more harmonics to add back in, whereas in a field recording, there's already quite a lot of detail going on, particularly when you're using a granular synthesizer and you have parameters that are jumping about so often. So from resampling the granular synthesizer, we are left with this bass line. Although the bass part for this track features a very heavily manipulated field recording, I wanted a layer that kind of hinted back to the original characteristics of the first recording. So what I did was I took the original recording again and I put it into a granular synthesizer, except I didn't process it with lots and lots of effects this time. And that way I was able to preserve that organic feel. Sounds a little something like this. So now that we have our bass parts and our glitch layer, we have a kind of very basic 4-bar loop. So from this point, it's just a case of building a few more elements with found sounds, such as constructing a drum kit. And then once you have that, it's all about just kind of extracting that loop into a song and adding variation to make it into a song. So I'll now play you a little bit of Guided by Environment 5 so you can see how it all kind of comes together. So, what's the problem with all of this? When you're taking an environmental recording, what you're doing is taking a single frame of a never-ending movie. Mother Nature is synonymous with being limitless and uncontrollable, so to try and capture something such as environment in a single frame is just absurd. So, to combat this, surely we can accept that the recordings used for Guided by Environment are purely for entertainment purposes. Well, by using these recordings for entertainment purposes, what we're actually doing is creating a distant space between us and ecology, which is contributing to a fictitious experience of environment. Bearing this in mind, I'll conclude this video with another question. Is Guided by Environment actually bad for the environment?